So, good afternoon. I am your host, Chanel. This is a Black Hippie Lounge. And so today I want to talk about a post that I saw that kind of correlates to this book that I've been listening to. I listen to audiobooks, and it's about like generational trauma in the sense of like emotionally available and unavailable parents and how that impacts you as a child and then as an adult. So, to give credit to the name of the book, let me just go back. The book is called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents: How to Heal from Distant, Rejecting, or Self-Involved Parents by Lindsay Gibson. And like I said, I've been listening to it on audio and it's been really great so far. And so just upon like scrolling online, I came across a post that was discussing like generational trauma and how it impacts the next generation and how it shows up and things like that. So I'm going to talk about it. It's from Instagram. The page was My Mental Health Space. And so I'll just kind of read it off and then discuss it. But again, it's an intergenerational trauma. So it's like first generation, second generation, third generation. First generation will be your grandparents. There are some examples like war, natural disasters, colonization, poverty, patriarchism, physically exalting work, cultural genocide, rape, famine, violence, domestic violence, immigration, oppression. Those are things that our grandparents potentially have experienced, and that impacted their parenting style, their behavior, their narrative, and epigenetic changes. So that transferred to second generation, which would be our parents, primary caregivers. So some traumas that they may have experienced: immigration, discrimination, racism, financial stress, loss of a primary caregiver, aggression, sexism, unemployment, acculturation, PTSD, identity loss, domestic violence, untreated mental illnesses. That's a big one. Repressed emotions. That's a big one. Addiction. That's a big one. Abuse and abandonment. So again, those things impacted their parenting style, their behavior, and their narrative. And so it comes down to people like me and you. But it doesn't have to be just me and you, because people of all generations listen to this, but it goes down to the third generation, which would include myself, the children, you. Things that we experience: anxiety, depression, perfectionism, anxiety, again, burnout, addiction, people pleasing, emotional numbing, identity issues, codependency, attachment issues, relationship issues, PTSD, low self-esteem, approval seeking. And I think a lot of that just stems from not just the generations before you in their parenting style, but also because we are a part of that time with social media and how that impacted like how people view themselves and mental health and anxiety and things like that. So those are like the three generations that we're going to talk about in the intergenerational trauma. And so I'm just going to read a little bit of what it says like under her message before I get into defining what intergenerational trauma is. So opening spaces to understand what intergenerational trauma, also called generational or multi-generational trauma, is and how it affects further generations and is passed down. Please note that the examples in the post are, of course, not complete and oversimplified. So what is intergenerational trauma and how is it passed down? So intergenerational trauma is when trauma is passed down through generations, not only affecting the person who experienced the trauma, but also the next generations. This occurs when a parent experiences, for example, adverse childhood experiences, which are also like called ACEs, racial trauma, discrimination, war, natural disasters. A lot of things that I mentioned before are forms of trauma. Research has shown that the trauma experienced by, like, for example, refugee, residential school, Holocaust survivor, impact populations for generations after the traumatic event. And research is still trying to understand the mechanisms of the transmission fully. But it has been shown that the trauma is passed down on different levels through the way parents behave and raise their children, but also through epigenetic changes. And so I definitely believe that like you can pass down trauma, even not just through your parenting style, but like the mom herself. It's been shown that when a woman is pregnant with her child or children, like it's very important to not be stressed. It's important not to experience trauma during that time because it can be passed down. That's just how the body is made and how it works. Like you literally pass down things like everything that you experience, your child is experiencing it with you. So it's very important to maintain like clarity and positive experiences, especially during your pregnancy, but also throughout like being a parent, because it impacts your children and yourself and the way that that child is not only raised, but just like how they, what the type of person that they become as an adult, and the various forms of trauma that they may experience while, you know, being raised by the parent. And so I think it's important to talk about, because I think that especially in I would say in the Black and Brown community, like there's a lot of generational trauma that is experienced, and it definitely plays a role and impacts how we interact with one another, how we view ourselves. And so, you know, intergenerational trauma is not necessarily something that people purposefully try to do. So, you know, I don't think that the parents are trying to do it. It's just a lot of it is like survival mode, and just learn, like when the way you're raised, that's all you know. And so as adults, you get into the world and then you're trying to figure out like, do I want to continue using the strategies and the way that I was raised, or do I want to explore something else? And upon exploring it, I think that that's kind of what we people of my generation are doing, is like we are exploring other ways to parent ourselves and to raise ourselves and to interact with one another in society. And so I think that sometimes we do need to be given a little bit more, like, I don't want to say credit, but at least some more leniency as far as like us even trying to do that, because it's not easy. And so yeah, I think that, you know, like credit can be given for that, right? And so I think that also credit can be given just to the generations before us also, because they obviously experienced certain things that we didn't necessarily experience in our generation. But at the same time, like at the end of the day, everyone has experienced some form of trauma. Every generation, our generation currently, the generation before us, and the generation before them, and before them, and before them, it's kind of almost inevitable to avoid that. But the point is, like, what are we doing with the trauma? Are we just kind of sitting in it and letting it impact our lives, or are we using it as a stepping stone to like make some changes? And I think that that's the difference between the generations, especially the second and third generation, is that I think that, like, when it says about the first generation being your grandparents, I think that they were very much in survival mode and very much still experiencing a lot of traumatic things. Again, every generation has experienced traumatic things, but their trauma was very different from what we were experiencing today and what our parents experienced. And so that's to not be like discredited. Like they experienced some very traumatic things. And so I think that their mindset was survival, of just getting out of that and how to take care of our parents. And so our parents, in turn, I think that, again, not all, because every family was different, but just like a basis of like how they've studied people who were raised in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, and the 80s, right? That there were great times, but there was also times of trauma, because whether it be with, like it said, like addiction and things like that, and how it impacted the homes, and impacted someone's childhood and how it impacted their mentality, and then what they chose to do with that and how they chose to deal with it. And I think that a lot of the times, like, people of our generation, we are very much more open to doing trauma healing in forms of like therapy, and just like in therapy, not just like one-on-one conversations, but all forms of therapy. Like, we do a lot of herbal therapy and just things like that, and just different, where I think that we're a little bit more open to explore things and try new things, versus like coming from the generation before, is like they kind of just know this is what works, this is what we used to do, and they just go with it. And it's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but there also could benefit from just exploring other options and like expanding and realizing that there's other ways to handle things. And I think that the most important factor of all of this is that understanding that for each generation, like our parents, our grandparents, and us who are now becoming parents, and when we become parents and stuff like that, is how we handle things. Because I think personally, like, using the excuse of that's not how I was raised or that's how I was raised is not really suitable to continue on the trauma. And even if you're not doing exactly what your parent did before you, if you're still like enforcing some form of trauma on your child, it's not like, you don't get like, oh, well, at least I didn't do that. You know what I mean? Like, okay, but you're still doing something. So that's to be explored, and that's to be, addressed. And again, nobody's perfect. No one's saying that there's ever going to be a generation that doesn't impose some form of trauma, because some of it is just unavoidable, because we can't avoid, like, ours is our generation. Like, we had 9/11, we had COVID, we had the wars, we had all that stuff, and it's still stuff going on, and there's still going to be probably more stuff going on. And those are really impactful things that like transformed the way that the world is. And I think that, I know I can really say, like, during COVID, I think that it was easy for adults to be like kind of focused on themselves in terms of like, oh, well, this is impacting me to go to work, or I'm not having work or something like that. But also, I think that a lot of times, just from at that time, I was working with kids, I was working in the high schools, and it wasn't even really highlighted that like this is affecting the kids too. Like, I can't imagine being like, yeah, it would be quote unquote like a dream to like, oh, we don't have to go to school. Like, we just can do our school work from home and like be virtual. But at the same time, you're in a developing stage in life where you need that social interaction physically, and like to see your friends and to interact with your friends and hug your friends and hang out with your friends, and to just have that basically swept from under you, and having no real deadline of when that would end and if it would end. And it's still just how it changed things. A lot of people didn't get to graduate like the way that everybody else graduates. Like, they're doing virtual graduations, not getting cap and gowns, not walking. So things like that, like, some people might not view that as trauma. It's like, oh, that's just how life is. But like, at the same time, no, that is kind of traumatic. Not traumatic, but it's a form of like change, and it's a result of trauma, if that makes sense, because of the way that COVID impacted things. A lot of people didn't experience some things that you can't go backwards. Like, it's just like prom. Like, if you miss your prom, you can't go back, like, typically you can't. Graduation, like, they're not going to hold another graduation. It's not the same. So once you miss it, it's done. And those are the things that a lot of people in our generation, well, not my generation, but the younger ones, experience. And so I think the point of that is just what I'm trying to say is like highlighting it. I think that we as a society, and especially like parents, I think what the post is saying is like to be able to acknowledge that there is trauma, because I think that sometimes too, that's something that parents to have a hard time doing. I think that when you aren't dealing with your trauma, it's very easy to not acknowledge your child's trauma, and say, well, you didn't experience what I experienced, so you're fine, right? Or and while that might be true, but even if they didn't experience what you experienced, then don't discredit what they've experienced too, and how it could impact your child, especially within adulthood. And like I said, the book that I'm reading, like, it's very great because it talks about just how what it looks like to have emotionally available versus emotionally unavailable parents, and then also how it impacts the child and how it's not just one way. Like your child could end up, there's a variation of ways that a child becomes from growing up in a situation like that with parents like that, and how they present themselves in society, and then also the types of trauma that they experience based on their personality, and then also how they handle the trauma, and then also how as adults they um, either heal that trauma, or if they inflict it on others, like their other children, the children that they end up having, or just in relationships, and how it shows up in relationships, and how it shows up within themselves, and how they choose to deal with it. So it's a very great book, but also it's an interesting topic to discuss because, like I said, it's a very big thing, and yeah. So just to go back to my post, I do want to read the other part. So some forms of like healing generational trauma may include acknowledging the trauma, breaking the silence, denial and neglect, asking questions and having difficult conversations, which I think in Black and brown communities, like families, that's not always easy. I think that a lot of times things are swept under the rug and neglected, and you're just kind of, it's not even our fault. Like it's not even your parents or your grandparents' fault. It goes way back to just like how, again, like terms of survival, like slavery and things like that. Like you think about like our ancestors were being raped, and like you could have a baby and your baby's getting taken away from you. Like you don't even know what your baby looks like, or you didn't even get to hug your baby or kiss your baby, or the chance to breastfeed your baby, nothing. And like the baby is gone. Like you have no way of tracking where your child is, and that's extremely traumatic. And I think that for a woman and a man, like, or just having your manhood be like stripped from you and tested, and you have really no way of like protecting yourself or your family as a man. And so that you see it in our society and like our family dynamics of how throughout the years and the different generations, like how it impacted us as a race, right? And so again, like my point of highlighting all this is like saying like it's not necessarily like, I'm not saying like, oh, your parents are this or your grandparents are that. It's just more so highlighting how our generation can make a difference moving forward, like for the next generations. And our grandparents, if your grandparents still alive, they could still make changes. Your parents definitely could still make changes. It's really like at the end of the day, any form of healing of trauma is up to the person. If they want to heal, they want to receive that type of help, then they should definitely do it. But it's really up to the person. So some other examples of healing generational trauma is creating a new community, showing vulnerability. That's a very big one. And I think that that's another one that our grandparents and our parents sometimes can struggle with. Speaking up against injustice. I think that's something that all our generations have done, but I know that at least I've experienced it in my generation, being a part, especially during COVID 2020, like Black Lives Matter, like getting out there and protesting and like speaking up, and like even using the podcast to speak out against injustice and have different topics that discuss the injustice, and bringing on guests to talk about it also. So just using various forms of platforms to do that. Learning healthy skills, setting boundaries, very important, healthy communication skills, healthy coping skills, expressing your feelings, thoughts, needs, and learning emotional regulation skills. So those are just some examples of ways that you can heal generational trauma. And then it says that connections are life. We are through connections. We learn through connections. We hurt through connections. We understand through connections. We heal through connections. We grow through connections. We thrive through connections. Connections are life. And that's very true. Everything is connected and everything is about a connection. And a connection can either be, I think that no connection is bad or good. I think that most connections can be both, because there's always something to learn from them. And it's just the fact of whether you are learning from the connection or not. And if you're not only learning, but understanding the lesson and using it to your benefit. to heal. And so it says, when we heal and grow, we heal for ourselves and for so much more. It is not only our lives that are changing, but also the lives of our families, our children, our friends, and our communities. Like ripples, it spreads throughout our families, communities, countries, and the world. Healing and growth is really about changing the future of humanity. And I think that's very true. I think that we have a long way to go, I think, with healing. I think we've done a lot of healing, more so like personally. And like sometimes through family stuff, but I think there's still a lot more work to do in that aspect. But again, I think it's all about whether people are open and vulnerable, and if they're willing to not only, I think the biggest thing I've learned, I think when it comes to healing, especially in families, is that like if it starts with the grandparents, right? And if the grandparents might have done things that your parents were affected by and received some form of trauma from, and maybe throughout their childhood and parts of their adulthood, they felt like that trauma was not acknowledged, and acknowledged in terms of like actually saying that, yes, this happened, but also like apologizing for it. And I think that also not just apologizing for, but making some changes, like seeing your grandparents make changes. But I think that the biggest thing with that is like the apology is almost not worth anything if the person that's receiving the apology is not willing to accept it and then move forward from it. Because I think that sometimes when we face trauma, it's easier to say like, this happened to me, this happened to me, this happened to me, and I owe get the apology. But what do you do after you get the apology? Do you still hold on to the trauma, or are you willing to let it go? Because if you're not willing to let the trauma go and you're still going to hold on to it and make that almost a part of your identity, it defeats the purpose of the person apologizing, and it's still going to affect the next generation because you're still holding on to that. Again, like I've said in many episodes, and I've done an episode, it's called Pack Light. It's very true. When you hold on to baggage, you can't go far. If you have things weighing you down, you can't go far. And not just physically, but as a person, like you can't develop far if you keep on holding on to all these traumas. And I'm not saying to not say that doesn't exist and to not acknowledge it, but what I know for me, I've experienced in my life, and I'm sure other people can, agree, is that you're not always going to get an apology for the things that happen to you in your life, whether it be from your parents or from other people. And that you get two choices. You can either sit there and sulk about it and say, this happened to me, and not do anything and prevent your own self from moving forward and growing. And I feel like in that sense, you've given the person way too much power over you. Or you can say, you know what, I deserved an apology, but I didn't get it. But I'm going to apologize to myself, my younger self, my inner child, that I experienced this and that it happened and that I wasn't aware of how to avoid it. But moving forward, I'm going to make different changes and make better choices and different, do my best to prevent something like this from occurring. And I think that's a big thing when it comes to generational trauma too, is like not harvesting on this idea of like, this person is supposed to apologize and make things right for me, and they were supposed to do this. But it's like, unless somebody else on this planet knows of, there's no time machine like you go back and now your parent or your grandparent or whatever can fix whatever happened. Like whatever happened. And I think that, again, we have to remember that everything happens for a reason, and sometimes trauma has to occur to birth something out of you that probably would not have came out of you if the trauma didn't occur. And if it didn't come out of you, then maybe your child will birth it. So just understanding like your power and understanding the power of trauma. There could be positive and negative. We talked about that in the last episode with Sheree, like how sexual trauma and stuff like that, but how you can take the power. And I think the biggest thing is like what you do with your power when it comes to trauma, because again, trauma is almost unavoidable in all aspects. And we as people learn how to deal with trauma and deal with it in a way that works for you in your healing. So I hope this was helpful. I'm going to post the things that I read off, and I'll even post like a screenshot of the book because I'm almost done with the audiobook. I think I've been killing it. It's really great. And it's about like emotional immaturity in your parents and how it impacts you, not just emotional immaturity, but emotional maturity, the difference between the two and how it impacts you and your siblings, and as a child and as an adult, and just how to really heal and understand why your parents do the things that they do, or they behave the way that they do, and why their parents behave the way that they did, and so on and so on. So I just felt like it correlated with this topic, and I thought it was interesting, and I'm sure other people, some listeners, you guys will agree that it's important. Actually, it's crazy because I saw one of my listeners, she was talking about a similar topic on her TikTok, and I was like, okay, wow, like this is definitely something I can record. So again, I hope this was helpful. I hope everyone has a great rest of their weekend. And as always, if you haven't already, follow me on TikTok and Instagram, and I have Facebook. All the names, it's all the same, at Black Hippie Lounge. And as always, meditate, manifest, invest in you, and take care.